It is time now for our weekend cover story. Bringing a child into the world should be one of the happiest moments of your life, but for some Aussie parents, the stark reality of staff shortages in hospitals right around the country is taking a toll.
That's right, a maternity ward in Geelong, the latest to shut down, while for months Gladstone Hospital in Queensland has been redirecting many mothers to a larger hospital much further from home. To discuss, let's bring in author and podcaster of Australian Birth Stories, Sophie Walker, and Gladstone mum, Paige McCarthy. Thanks for joining us, both of you. Paige, I want to start with you. You were impacted by this situation in Gladstone when giving birth to your beautiful little boy, Tate. What was your experience like?
Yeah, so about 3 months ago, I gave birth to my son, Tate. It was a very unknown circumstance of what was going to happen because we were told we were going to have to birth in Rockhampton. So as the time approached, we were unsure what our plan was, but we arrived at the Gladstone Hospital and I was too far along for them to be happy for me to transfer via ambulance or by road to Rockhampton. So I was faced with having to birth in Gladstone without any pain relief or any obstetricians. It was just my midwife who was going to be there. Thankfully, I had a really successful birth and everything went to plan, which I couldn't have been happier with, but I did have a complication post-birth and had about a 2-litre hemorrhage. So I had to go to Rockhampton post-birth, which took about 8 hours for the ambulance to arrive in Gladstone to get me to Rockhampton, where I had to then stay for 4 days away from all of my family, away from all our loved ones, away from my daughter, which was a really difficult time and something that's still quite raw today and quite difficult to, comprehend that postpartum period has been lost because I wasn't able to be close to my family and close to my key supports, which I needed to have during that difficult time as well.
Well, we're glad it all turned out for you, but we're sorry that you did have to go through that. Sophie, you speak to hundreds, thousands of women for your podcast. Paige's story is one of countless experiences across Australia. Can you paint a picture for us as to how big an issue staff shortages in maternity wards are right now?
It's really a huge problem. Sort of prior to Gladstone being on everybody's radar over the last sort of 280 days while they've been on bypass, we've known that the best model of care for mothers and babies is to have a known care provider through their pregnancy, during their birth and in their postpartum. We know that that's the best model of care, and yet 8% of Australian women have access to that. Now, we've seen the tragedies of what Paige has just shared of her experience, and she's one of 400 women from Gladstone and Biloela area that have had to make that transfer, and it's simply just not good enough. And the government have had 280 days to rectify this, and it's come to light this week that they actually knew quite a bit ahead of time that this was on the cards, and yet still nothing's been done. And as you said, there's been a recent closure in Victoria where I'm based. Geelong is one of the fastest growing areas for young families in Victoria, and yet they've just lost a maternity centre. Similarly in Tasmania, Burnie's just had a maternity centre closed down. So although things are really dire in Gladstone, it's almost a temperature check for what's unfolding across the country.
Well, Paige, tell us more about Gladstone, because we know that more than 400 bypass babies were actually born there. It's ceased its operations. We understand the community's banding together now. What kind of impact is that having on sort of mobilising the community?
Yeah, look, I think we've had a change, so they've allowed low-risk births will begin to start with a new phase that's come in, which is fantastic that we've gotten to that point. But it really shouldn't have taken us almost 12 months to achieve something like that for a town that has over 60,000 people. And for the women in Gladstone, yeah, that's fantastic for people who have upcoming births, but for all the women that were put on bypass, the stress and the grief that's now caused, because this is going to be their birth story, is, that's something that can't be changed. And having spoken to a lot of women around Gladstone, it's been a really, really tough time for everyone. Yeah.
It's a stressful enough thing in the first place, giving birth. To have this layer on top of it just makes it so much harder. Sophie, what needs to be done to address this issue?
There seems to be a real lack of talking to women that are on the ground, midwives and doctors that are working in these systems. I know when I spoke to Paige on the podcast at that time, about 3 months ago, there was talk of obstetricians coming in, and yet the midwives that she was working with and knew hadn't been notified at all. And I think over the last, as Paige said, nearly a year, a lot of things could have been done. There's a lot of midwives could have been upskilled during that time to be able to administer different procedures to allow more women that fall in that in between. They're perhaps not considered low risk, but they're not high risk either, and they could be managed by a supportive care providing team that knew when they were coming in and how to treat them and care for them.
All right. Well, Sophie and Paige, thanks so much for joining us. And as you just said, Jane, when a baby comes, it waits for no one, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you want that peace of mind, you want that expertise
Yeah.
around you to make sure everything goes well.
And you want to know where it's going to happen, and you
Yeah.
want it to be close to home and your loved
course.
ones.
Hey there, Today fans. Sarah and
What's my name again?
oh my goodness, Carl.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel, though. Subscribe now for more news, special reports, and amazing Aussie stories.
And Carl misbehaving,
Whoa,
of course.
that never happens.
always happens.
What's she talking about?